Welcome back to the Faith Forward podcast. John Ackerman, joined today by my good friend Lee Towns.
Hey,
Lee,
John.
thanks for coming.
It's good to be here.
Yeah, it's good to have you here. So obviously that means Lee did the message this Sunday. And so we're going to talk about this second week of this series that Brian kicked off last week about how the resurrection isn't just something that informs our story, it's something that rewrites our story. Yeah. And so last week Brian talked about how the resurrection rewrites our story of shame.
Yeah.
And that, unfortunately, is a word that has a place in everyone's story.
Yeah.
And that's not something that we just have to perpetually endure forever. There is an invitation for new life, for transformation because of the empty tomb. And so today we're going to continue with this series of how the resurrection doesn't just inform our story, but rewrites it. Yeah. And specifically, we're going to talk today about how that empty tomb replaces despair with hope.
It does.
That what seems to be ruined can be restored. Mm-hmm. That the resurrection not only rewrites our story of despair and hopelessness, but in some ways it actually rewrites our story of hope.
It does.
And how we hope and what we hope for. So recognizing that oftentimes people access this days, weeks, months after they've heard the message, which of course is always the primary invitation because context matters. Lee, give folks a little bit of a recap of what you probably said on Sunday.
Yeah. So usually when we come to this part of the podcast and we do a recap, at least for me, I have a tendency just to kind of work through my outline, but for this particular message, I'm going to just do a little bit more of a freestyle kind of moment here.
Nice.
So when I first got the invitation to preach the message, Brian had mapped out, here's where he saw the series going. One of the things that he had written down on a piece of paper was, here's this text, and let's talk about how the empty tomb rewrites our story with hope. And that is absolutely what the message is about. It's about hope. But what struck me as I was reading the passage was it's a flawed, kind of analogy, or it's a flawed comparison. But in my mind, I have a couple of stereotypes, and so when I thought about hope, I thought, well, that's a Christmas word, right? And when Jesus was born, there's hope, and when I think about that hope, I think about we have hope because there's all kinds of good that's coming. There's a reward. There's a gift that's coming, and it's kind of like that hope for a present. And I know all that's in context of Christmas, but Easter hope feels a little different to me. It's really more about a confidence. It's about living in the now in a way that is redefined and reshaped. And so I really began to pray about, what's in this text that points us to an Easter hope? Because the text is about an empty tomb, and why is that a little bit different than a filled cradle, or a manger? And not that they're different in that they're opposing. There's just a nuance. And I recognize that. Again, kind of a flawed comparison, but that was kind of where my heart was and what the Lord was stirring in me. And so as I read through the text, in all fairness, there's one word in the text that just jumped off the page to me. And I kept going, okay, I can't preach a sermon on one word.
That's not true, but yeah.
but there's one word in the middle of what Paul's saying that just captured me, that I felt like said the difference, or at least the difference that I was feeling. And so, as I read through the text, let me give a quick run on the text. 1 Corinthians 15 is kind of the primary source place. And 1 Corinthians 15 is one of my favorite places to go to and say, this is what we believe, because Paul does a really simple clarification of the message of the gospel. That's how he starts 1 Corinthians 15. And it really runs like this. Jesus lived, he died, he rose again, and those elements, those things, were witnessed by various groups of people, including Paul himself. So he's basically saying, we came to you and we told you this. We told you that Jesus lived, he died, he rose again, and we've seen it. We know it. So the whole witnesses thing is this isn't a fairy tale. It's not a fantasy. This is a factual thing. I've got plenty of evidence to point to the fact that it's true, including an empty tomb, but people saw a resurrected Jesus to verify that. And so he reminds the reader, hey, this is what you believe. This is what you accepted. Well, apparently, I mean, we can pull this together from the way he writes this. And of course, we know it from historical record as well. But there was an emerging belief that there was no resurrection from the dead. And so he does the reminder, and then he says, okay, and he starts in verse 12 with a series of if-then statements. Like, okay, if there's no resurrection of the dead, let's stop and think about this for a minute. Here's the consequence of this. And what he shows us in that is that if we're not careful, we can live with a ruined faith. And he says, look, the empty tomb restores a ruined faith. There's just something compelling about that story, right? That our faith is based on this thing that happened, and it all hinges on the fact that the tomb is empty and Jesus rose from the dead. And so the empty tomb moves us from logic to faith. Now, I want to be really careful because in the message I talk about this whole idea of logic. It's not that logic's bad. It's not that logic is wrong. It's not even that logic is necessarily the enemy. But when logic ignores and eliminates some fact, and particularly facts that relate to the supernatural, unexpected work of Jesus, then there's a problem. You have a conflict. And what you see, Paul's raising this, what he does with this if-then is he says, look, logic is in conflict with fact. Like, the fact is the tomb is empty, Jesus rose from the dead. Logic says, well, that can't happen. Death is final, it's permanent. So now we got this problem. Logic and fact are in conflict. And here was what I noticed, and what I've seen in so many times in my life is this. When logic and fact disagree, that's where faith kicks in. And that is what our whole walk with Jesus is built on, is that God does the supernatural and the unexpected. That yes, there's a logic here, and there are a lot of things that God does that conform to logic. He is not here to refute and redefine logic. But there are things God does that fit outside of logic. He is not limited by and confined to logic. And so therein lies the question of faith. And if we try to build faith on logic alone, then it's ruined. But the empty tomb restores that, because the empty tomb forces you to go, that's not logical, but it's factual because God did it. Faith. And faith is restored at that point. So he works that narrative, and then he works a second narrative as he says it. Here's the good thing about it. Like, here's all the if-then. Here, faith is built on logic alone that eliminates faith, that eliminates the supernatural. That is a hopeless place. And then he goes, but here's the deal. We have hope, and here's why we have hope. Because not only does the empty tomb restore ruined faith, but the empty tomb restores ruined futures. And so then he pivots and he goes, here's what happens because Jesus, and I love that, I think it's verse 20. I love that. I mean, we talk about this all the time. One of my favorite words in the Bible is but, but Jesus did in fact rise from the dead. So the consequence of that is futures are restored. And what seems to be ruined, now we look and we go, the natural progression, and just think about this for a minute, the natural progression of life is a compiling of ruin that leads to the ultimate ruin of death, right? It's this slow plod towards the ultimate ruin. Like it's going to be destroyed, it's going to be useless, it's going to be beyond repair, and the ultimate finality of that is in death. It can't be repaired. But Jesus, because Jesus rose from the dead, all those things that seemed ruined can now be restored. And he pivots and he points to the resurrection of Jesus and says, look, here's the incredible truth that because Jesus rose from the dead, this thing is happening. His resurrection from the dead is a demonstration that he is not limited to the things of logic, that he can defy logic in his supernatural power, and that God can restore what seems to be final and permanent and catastrophic and all of the words that you might put there that fit under that category of ruined. And as he walks through that, and here's the word, or I'm making my way to the word upon which I wanted to build this sermon. As he walks through it, in verse 19, he makes his final if-then statement, and it's a compelling statement. If there's no resurrection of the dead, or if we live believing that Jesus, our faith is for this life only, we are to be more pitied than anyone else. That if there's no resurrection for the dead and we've lived our life in that shadow only, that Jesus just came for the now because death is final, well, then we should feel sorry for those who believe that. And that word only it just caught me. It's just such a compelling word. Now, what he's saying initially and on the surface and factually, I mean, this is true. He's saying, look, because Jesus was raised from the dead, it's not only for this life. Like we're not limited there. He's saying, look beyond it. And only is that word that's an invitation that there is more, right? I mean, that's something we've been talking about, as a team, the idea that there is more. And only just drips with anticipation and expectation. And so he goes, look, if the resurrection didn't happen, then our faith is only for this life. And he pivots and says, or he leads us through that only word to look beyond death and say, but instead, because Jesus rose from the dead, it's not only for this life, it's for the next life, right? There's a promise, and there's a reality of heaven, and there's reality of life after death, and all of those things that we know are dividends of Jesus in the future. But I was struck by the fact that only drips with expectation for the now, not just the then. Like, he doesn't say, look, you've got it wrong. The resurrection is about after death, and our hope is only in the after death. It's not an exclusive statement. It's actually a statement that says it's now and then. And he points at the then, and we resonate with that. Now, the reason that he does that is contextually in the culture, the Epicurean ideology was really captivated by the now. And he was going, you got to look past the now. You got to look to the then. I think if I have any sense about our human instinct, particularly in the context of the church subculture, we flipped that. And now we are preoccupied with the then and we forget the now. And that's what struck me in the middle of this, was Paul saying it's both now and then. He's lifting our eyes to the then, but not so that we'll ignore the now, so that we can fully embrace the now. If God can restore a ruined future then, man, what can he do with what seems to be ruined now? And there is where the message landed for me, and where I really want to make sure people hear that today, that yes, God has secured our place in heaven. When we say yes, there is an afterlife, that promise of life after death that we love to talk about. And there's a consolation in that. There's a sustaining force in that. But where we are right now, like, the empty tomb is a promise of a future here. It's a promise, and it's a promise that is echoed in the Old Testament. Actually, it's foreshadowed in the Old Testament. This is echoing that. God says to his people Israel in Jeremiah, I know the plans I have for you, not to harm you. And it's very deliberate. In just about every translation, it's these two words, to give you a hope and a future. Like I'm here to change the path, both here in this life and in the life yet to come. And just so I can rush to the big point, it's possible that people listening to the message, but it's also possible people listening to this podcast are sitting there feeling ruined. Here's the bottom line. What seems to be ruined, God can restore. That's the hope and the future of the empty tomb. The resurrection rewrites your story. You're not ruined. That's me a little more freestyling, working through the message, but I am going to work very hard to say that in the message.
Nice. I look forward to that. And so hopefully all of you that just heard that resonates with what you heard before. And as is always the case, Lee, what we try to do here is how do we take what we heard on Sunday and now make it imminently practical?
Yep.
And you finished your message with a bunch of practical steps, which really for me launched what we want to talk about here is a little bit of reframing that helps us engage in the practical.
Yeah.
Because the way that we think about hope affects the level of restoration that we look for, the level of restoration that we think God is capable of. Again, we intellectually assent to the idea that God can do whatever he wants, and he can make things as big and as beautiful and as bold as he wants. But we have a lived experience that's told us there's a limit, there's a threshold, and maybe things get better later. Right. And you said that's the trap that modern culture, really since the Middle Ages, has fallen into, is this life kind of sucks, but don't worry, there's a better one coming. And Jesus comes out of the wilderness saying, the kingdom of heaven is here, and I've come that you might have life and life abundant, starting now.
We buy into a just hold on kind of theology that says if you can just outlast this present pain, and there's some truth about that. There is. I'm not denying that.
Yeah, what comes next is great.
But if you can outlast that, then there's really good things to come. When the empty tomb actually says now. Starting now. And there's just something powerful about that.
Yeah. And so one of the things that has been helpful for me in the years since I first found this was a recognition that the way that I have defined hope very practically in my life, not the way I define the word, but the way that I engage with hope has an effect on that abundant life that I'm looking for now, on the level of restoration that I believe is possible now. So all credit to one of my favorite authors for this one, John Eldredge, who laid out levels of hope that if we can start to look through this lens, helps us recognize where we've misapplied hope or miselevated our hope. And so he talks about casual hope as sort of the first layer, critical hope as the second, ultimate hope as the top. And so your casual hope is stuff like, you've got people over for dinner. My wife and I love entertaining, and I love to cook. She loves to cook. We love to cook together. And the times where you feel like, I really hope this comes out right. Even if it's something you've made before, right? I've got steaks going on the grill, or we've got something going in the oven, and you know that the timing is a little bit suspect, and you're like, I really hope this comes out just right. Not undercooked, not overcooked. Or you're out shopping on a crazy Saturday, and you're like, I really hope I find a parking spot. Or I really hope I get a raise at work because that would be nice. Right? Those are casual hopes. There's nothing wrong with those hopes. Those are fantastic hopes to have. But what happens is we sometimes turn those casual hopes into an elevated version, into something that's more critical. When that dish that I've got going in the oven or on the grill turns into, if this is ruined, the night is ruined. I've just escalated that hope to a place it doesn't belong. If I've turned, I want a raise because that would be nice, to I have to have a raise or all is ruined. And I'm not disputing the reality that there are times where what's needed because of life circumstances is it seems like there's no other way than this. And so I'm putting all of my eggs in on this. But what that fails to recognize sometimes is that there are genuinely critical hopes. Things like the doctor's going to call back today, and I really hope the screening was negative. Or I really hope the test result was positive. Because we've been hoping for a baby and it's been a struggle. Or I really hope I find the person that God has for me in this life, because that has been a deep yearning and ache for me. Those are so far above and beyond, I hope dinner turns out okay. But what we've often done with hope is we've started mixing categories, and we've allowed casual hopes to become critical, and we've allowed critical hopes to become ultimate hopes. That if I never find my person, this life has no meaning. That if we don't ever get the chance to hold a little one in our arms, then this life was wasted. That if I don't ever find the profession and the calling that I feel like is intrinsically wired in me, then I've wasted my life and all the We've now just escalated significant hope, critical hopes, to a level of ultimate hope where our existence is now defined by
Right.
whether or not this turns out.
Right.
And what John Eldredge writes about is that place of ultimate hope is reserved for one thing and one thing only. And it's the reality of who Jesus says he is, who God revealed him to be, and the promise of the reality that is available now
Right.
and proceeds into eternity, that he is who he is, I am who he says I am, my future is secure. And so as Hebrews 6:19 talks about, that hope is the anchor for your soul.
Right.
If other things get put in that ultimate category, I'm setting myself up for heartache and heartbreak.
Right.
But if that ultimate hope is allowed to be the only thing that it's supposed to be, my critical hopes can stay critical hopes. And that doesn't mean they're not significant, and it doesn't mean they're not important.
Right.
It doesn't mean I have a lot of hope invested in it.
Right.
But it now no longer defines my life.
Right.
And if I then get those critical hopes locked in, then the casual hopes can just be casual hopes. And if
Right.
the dinner doesn't work out, it's okay. Because there are other things I hope more in, and my ultimate hope is what's anchoring my soul.
Right.
And if we can first come to terms with what we've done with our hopes and where we've placed them, that slow realignment with God of sort of first things first. You put the big rocks in first and then build everything else in around it. That can really begin to make a practical shift in our life as we're navigating all the things we hope for.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's not to say that it doesn't feel heavy and hard and super important in any of those levels, when our hope is questionable.
They all
right?
matter.
It's not negating that, but it's lifting our eyes up and saying, okay, I've got to, in the midst of this, even though I'm feeling the magnitude of these feelings, I've got to get them in the right level so that they don't define me.
Yeah.
And that's the reason the whole idea of this series, that the resurrection, Jesus rose from the dead. In fact, later in the text, Paul's going to say the ultimate enemy is death. There's that old saying, there are only certain things that are true in life, and the one that's a constant is death.
100% success
death,
rate.
Taxes, and usually there's something comical that we fill in to the list. But death is the constant, right?
Yeah.
That it is the ultimate absolute in life, death. And so he says, here's the ultimate end, but Jesus is greater than the ultimate end. Yes. Therefore, all of the other hopes can be framed underneath the fact that Jesus rose from the dead. And he rose from the dead so that you and I can find our identity in him. Yeah. And that trumps everything. And it reframes that. It puts it all back in order. When I think about that, I think about the effect of a missions trip on somebody.
Sure.
And, you go and you feel like you're living life, and you feel like, oh man, I don't have enough, or my life is hard. And then you go on a missions trip and you see somebody else, and it puts things in, we like to say it like this, perspective, right? That's what the tomb does, is it puts our hopes in perspective and gives them appropriate weight. And so at a real practical level, I mean, I know we've got a lot to go through before we get to the practical level, but it's very possible that like you said, like if dinner collapses, I'm ruined, right? It feels catastrophic. And I would hope that, in the middle of that, we could take a breath and go back and go, my life's not over, and I shouldn't, think fatal thoughts because of burnt steak, But sometimes it feels that large. In the middle of that, when it feels like all is ruined, okay, here's a very practical step. One step back. Jesus is alive. He lived, he died, he rose again. The tomb is empty. And the tomb is empty for my life. Okay, I can live with a burned steak. I can live with being passed over for a raise. I can live with a failed relationship. I can live with a loss of a job. I can live with dreams that aren't yet fulfilled, because Jesus rose from the dead.
Yeah.
That's how it reframes it. So if you're in that place where you feel ruined, a step back and go, Jesus rose from the dead. Jesus rose from the dead for me. He rose from the dead for me. That reframes it. And that's, I mean, in a real practical way. That's, if you're in that desperate place, hear that today.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes me think of what you were saying earlier, Lee, that what happens when logic and facts reach a disagreement.
Yeah.
That what we're not saying is, well, just don't have hopes, right? Just live in the reality that Jesus is who he says he was, and he lived, and he died, and he rose again, and the tomb's empty,
Right.
and so you shouldn't feel bad. That's not the point.
No.
That's not the point. One of my favorite Proverbs, for a weird reason, because it offers hope.
Yeah.
But it talks about what happens when hope is not yet realized. It's Proverbs 13, verse 12. Hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a dream fulfilled is a tree of life. And so that, for me, gets at the crux of this issue of you are not meant to live without hope. That's actually faithless. It is faithless to live without hope. There are things you're supposed to be hoping for.
Right.
That's a large part of the reason why God invited throughout the Old Testament people to hope towards the day the Messiah came, rather than live hopelessly, like, well, I guess this just sucks forever.
Right.
And then once Jesus died, he told his followers, don't live without hope, because I'm going to come back.
Right.
And then when he came back, he said, don't live without hope because I'm leaving, but I'm sending you myself.
Right.
And then when he sent them the Spirit and left, he said, don't live without hope because I'm coming back.
Yeah.
Right? We, as people who profess belief in God and desire to follow him and live with him, you are constantly called to a life of hope that has not yet materialized.
Right.
And part of what Solomon points out in this proverb is the hope that's not yet realized has an effect.
Yeah.
And you're not supposed to pretend it doesn't.
Yeah.
Right? Even if dinner didn't work out as planned, that doesn't mean get all stoic and pretend like you're fine.
Yeah.
It means acknowledge the disappointment, but don't allow the disappointment to exist at a level where it's not meant to live.
Yeah, I think that's that word upon which my heart just built this message is a beyond word.
Yes.
It calls us to look beyond, but it doesn't cause us to stop. That's why I love the word is there's an acknowledgement of the current hope, and that hope could be hope deferred.
Yeah.
Now, some of those hopes will be realized, but could be hope deferred. So when it feels like that hope deferred is too heavy, Paul goes, but here's the good news. Yeah. If you lift your eyes up, you see that the hope is yet to be realized. And so look beyond even the most fatal ruin moment. Look beyond death. And that's why he points, it's not just for this life. And he does his run of, look, if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, it is utterly hopeless. This is useless. That's one of the words he uses. This whole thing is useless, and despair is our only companion at that point. And so I love the beyond idea, because it helps us navigate having hope not yet met, and allowing hope to be met in the process of moving through life.
Yeah.
And so there'll be some of those hopes that will be realized immediately. There'll be some of those hopes that will be realized in time, and there'll be some of those hopes that we will wait till post-death to find out how and why God worked it the way he worked it. And the reality is that works if we have the ultimate hope. Yeah. That is the empty tomb.
Yeah. And so again, I want to say it again, mostly because I've been in too many places where the Christian life that's promoted is what amounts to a hopeless one.
Yeah.
I'm just not going to have any desires. I've had any number of conversations with folks that come in and they're convinced that the way God wants them to live is without desire, without hope for anything other than someday we'll get to heaven.
Yeah.
And that's not at all. That's not at all the gospel invitation, but it is right ordering.
In Paul's letter to the Corinthians, in another passage, he goes through a litany of hopes that are deferred or not yet met.
Yeah.
We're hard pressed on every side.
Yeah.
We're perplexed, but he says, but we have a treasure in jars of clay.
Yeah.
We are not in despair.
Yeah.
And if we don't frame our hope around the ultimate hope in Jesus, and then let the subordinate, all of the unmet hopes will lead us to despair.
Yes.
And the non-resurrected logic,
right.
There's no resurrection, leaves us with one alternative, despair.
Yeah.
And that's our companion. And it doesn't mean we don't walk through hard times.
Right.
But it means we don't abandon hope.
Right. Yeah, and that is the key distinction, is, again, it comes back to the logic versus facts. So many people try to logic their way through hopelessness.
Yes.
So many people try to logic their way through despair rather than walking through it.
Right.
That, well, I'm just going to tell myself everything's fine. I'm going to tell myself I shouldn't feel this way. And so there's a few things that we need to clarify here. And one is that hope and faith don't negate loss.
No.
Hope and faith don't negate heartache. Hope and faith don't negate the pain of losing someone or losing something. I mean, Jesus himself in the Sermon on the Mount says, blessed are those who mourn. He doesn't say get over it.
Right.
He doesn't say that shouldn't bother you. There's more important things.
Right.
He says, blessed are those who mourn.
Right.
One of the Psalms that David records, he pens, God is close to the brokenhearted. Mm-hmm. God's not standing at a distance tapping his foot like, I can't believe you're letting this bother you this much. Right. There is closeness in the pain, in the hardship, in the suffering, in the disappointment, in the despair. We're not meant to stay there, but we're also not meant to pretend like it's not happening and just put on the face that says God is good all the time, and all the time God is good.
Well, the empty tomb, through to this point, the empty tomb doesn't say there is no death.
Right.
The empty tomb says there's more than death. It
doesn't get the last word.
And that's a really, really, really important truth. Because what we want the narrative to say is God eliminated the heart.
Right.
The death is over.
Yeah.
But no, there's still death.
Yeah.
Like Jesus died.
Right.
That's a part of the story. He died.
Yeah.
But death wasn't the end. That's the hopeful part of the story, is it's not the end. Not that it's absent. And I'm going to tell the story Sunday. By now I have told the story of a funeral I did for someone that was utter despair because they had no mooring and context of the eternal and a relationship with Jesus. But I've also been at funerals with those who have that mooring. And it's not that there's not tears. No. There's tears at both funerals. It's not that there's not a sense of loss. There's that sense of loss. There's grief. There is mourning at both of those contexts. It's just reframed.
Yeah.
If there is a utter despair and hopelessness in the finality of death, but because the tomb is empty, it rewrites our story.
Yep.
It rewrites the narrative that says death is the last chapter. Mm-hmm. It's not. Yes, there is pain to walk through. Death is still there. Yeah. Grief is still there. Loss is still there. It is, but it's reframed.
Yeah.
It's reframed.
And this is where we have to get to the other practical piece, because this is how we got to the place where it said, this life is going to suck, but don't worry, there's a better day coming. Mm-hmm. And we go back to this verse in Proverbs, hope deferred makes the heart sick. But it doesn't finish with, but don't worry because there's a better day coming. It finishes with, but a dream fulfilled is a tree of life. Jesus said, I came that you might have life and have it abundantly. And the grammatical context is starting now. He comes out of the wilderness with the gospel of repent because the kingdom of heaven is here. It's here now. It's available. He hasn't even gone to the cross yet. And he comes out of the wilderness saying the kingdom of heaven is here. You can start experiencing this right now, today. You don't have to wait till the end. And so we get to live in the tension, which I feel like is so often the definition of the Christian life, between both the not yet and the already that is now, and the not yet and the already that is to come. And so what we often try to do as human beings is swing to extremes.
Yeah.
So either, well, I'm just going to shut down my entire inner world. I'm going to have no hopes. I'm going to have no desires, because then I can't have any disappointments,
Right.
and I won't have any hurts, and I won't ever be sad, right? Nothing will ever have to die, right? I won't have to deal with death at all.
Right.
I won't have to deal with the death of anything,
Right.
and then I'll get to the good stuff later.
Right.
Or we swing in the other direction of what I'm experiencing now defines my reality. And so if I'm dealing with hope deferred, that defines the truth about the world. It defines the truth about me. It defines the truth about God, because right? Jesus, you said life and life abundant right now, and I'm not experiencing it the way that I think it should be experienced.
Right.
And so that must mean all is lost. And so we have to allow ultimate hope to be ultimate.
Right.
Everything else to fall into context, but then we also have to allow God to be the interpreter of our context, to help us understand that there is death,
Right.
there is loss, there is heartache,
Right.
but there are also dreams fulfilled right now.
Right. I was, as you were talking, I was thinking about this, that because you and I both we're kind of striking at the same thing, that we've picked up a narrative inadvertently with good intention in the church, that, listen, check all your hopes, because that's for then, right? And so Jesus rose from the dead, which means after you die, your hopes will be fulfilled. We haven't intended to say that, but subliminally, that's kind of been our answer. Oh, life's hard. Don't worry. Just hang on, because when you die, there's good stuff, right? And that's why I love this word only, because the consequence of that narrative, in the worst expression, and I'm super sensitive to this week, the consequence of this word is we can say, oh, there's a reward and hope fulfilled after death. Yeah. So death is the price I must pay. So why don't I just go ahead and pay it? Yeah. And it's the worst expression. Yeah. It's the worst outcome. But we're creating a narrative if we ignore only. Yeah. We're creating a narrative that says, I can get my hope now by taking my life. Yeah. And that's terrifying to me. Because Jesus didn't rise from the dead so that you, when you die, can have hope fulfilled. Jesus rose from the dead so that you might have life and life abundantly now. Yeah. Whatever feels hard, the answer is not pay the death man so that you can have it. That's not the answer. No. That's not the answer. It reframes it when you realize, if he rose from the dead, he can fix my marriage. He can fix my career. He can fix my reputation. He can fix my character. Nothing is ruined if death is conquered. Yeah. And so death is not the necessary payment to hope fulfilled. Death reframes the weight of the hopes that I have. Yeah. And I feel so passionately about my heart just aches knowing that there are people who are walking among us that are putting on a good face, but they feel ruined. And some are considering, okay, well, I'll just pay the man, and then I can have the reward. Yeah. That's not the answer. No. That's not the answer. No. And just because I want to be sensitive to the topic, if you're watching this and you're at that place, stop right now, pick up your phone, call CFC, let us help you. Yeah. We want to help you. We don't want you to make that choice. Yeah. Yeah. Because as you said, everything can be restored. Everything can be restored. Another person that I've learned a lot from spoke to this issue of when it feels like what my emotions are telling me has to be the truth, right? Mm-hmm. The feelings are just so raw. They're so visceral. They're so powerful. They're so overwhelming that my logic is failing me in the face of what feels like fact. Yeah. And my friend Bob Hamp said it this way: your emotions will never lie to you. And when I heard him say that first part, I was like, hold up.
I have questions. But he said, let me finish. He said, your emotions will never lie to you. They will always tell you the truth about what you believe.
So good.
And I realized that that is the case for all of us, that so often, right, emotions aren't bad. Emotions are God-given. Jesus runs the full gamut of emotion during his earthly life. Yeah. God displays the full gamut of emotion throughout the scriptures. Yeah. Emotions aren't bad. It's when emotions sit in the driver's seat and dictate the terms of reality. And so the invitation for us is to acknowledge what we feel, but to not necessarily acknowledge that what we feel is absolute truth. Yeah. Right? There are times where I have felt hopeless, where I have felt in absolute despair. No good can come from where I am now. There's no way out. I was having some of those feelings last week as I was navigating something challenging with another person in my life, that it honestly felt like, I think this is the end. Yeah. I don't see any way where this gets better this side of eternity. Right. But I know enough now to pause that spiral where emotion is leading and dictating terms, and realizing that, again, that's not just me, because Jesus also said in that same verse that I've come that you might have life and have it abundant, and you referenced this on Sunday as well. There is a thief who comes to steal, kill, and destroy. That the kingdom of darkness is working just as hard to bring death as the kingdom of heaven is bringing life. Yes. And what I was realizing in that moment, where hope is spiraling and despair seems all but certain, I just paused and I took a breath. The things we teach small children work for adults. Yeah. Take a breath and hold it for a few seconds. Count to 10. That has a regulating effect on your inner world. Yeah. And then I just turned to God and I said, God, what's true? And it was interesting. What he said to me didn't solve all the problems. Right. And he didn't even necessarily say, I promise that everything's going to get better by this date and here's what's going to happen. Right. But what he told me was, in a very personal context, he said, I go before you and I go behind you. Mm-hmm. He said it to me 3 times. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting when God repeats himself. It's not because he thinks he's not being clear. It's because he knows we need the repetition.
He's making a point.
Right? He said 3 times, I go before you and I go behind you. And that particular phrase means something very special to me, because the prayer of St. Patrick's breastplate, is just something that has resonated with me ever since I first found it. Yeah. And there's a longer form version of that, but that phrase contextualizes for me a larger reality of what's true in the world, and what's true about God, and what's true about me, and what's true about God's ability and God's power and God's kindness and God's love. And in that moment, all God had to say was, I go before you and I go behind you. 7 words, 3 times. And again, it's not like suddenly everything in my life is fixed, but the emotions are no longer telling me what's true. Yeah. The truth is telling me what's true. Yeah. And I realized that what God told me is not meant to be prescriptive, right? That's not the answer to your question. But we always desire to make things practical. So the most practical thing is when you recognize that hope is spiraling, when you realize that despair is mounting, when you realize that death seems like the only possible victor in the scenario, there is one who is available who has already overcome death and despair and hopelessness, and is willing to tell you the truth about what's real if we give him our attention. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, this can turn into a trap of a different kind when I start telling myself what I think God's going to do. Right? So we come back again to this intersection of logic and fact. Yep. God raised Jesus from the dead. True. Yep. God will make all things new. Will be true. So God will do this thing that I really want him to do, and I'm going to stand firm on that. Hold up. We don't get to live in a place of self-directed hope and faith. Yeah. We follow the example of the one who was meant to be the example, who said, God, here's what I want, and not my will, but yours be done, and then waited to hear what God's will was.
Right. And it went exactly where he said, I don't want.
Right.
He let this pass. I don't want, if I can get out of this.
Right. But then there's also that part that Hebrews 12 talks about, that for the joy set before him,
He endured.
He endured. Right? And so often we skip past the first part to get to the part where Jesus didn't get what he wanted because God's mean and God never gives us what we want. And it's always hard, but someday, right? We're right back to that old mentality. And that's not it, because it starts with for the joy set before him. Now, that's not like he's hanging on the cross with a big old smile on his face, because hurt and heartache is real. And at the same time, closeness and connection and hope can be real in the heartache. And so let us not fall into the trap of self-directed faith and hope. Of, I saw what God did here, and I saw what God did here, and so God's going to do what I want him to do here. And that's what I'm placing my hope in. Because that's where we put the critical hope in the place of ultimate hope. And if that's not what God's actually doing, and if that's not what God said he's going to do, we've now defined our entire world and our entire worldview and our entire faith view through the lens of what I just said, rather than what God just said.
And the hope of the empty tomb that Paul calls us to in that statement is that what seems to be ruined can be restored. But it doesn't say it's going to be restored as I would restore it. It says God can restore what seems to be ruined. It gives us hope that we're not ruined, but it doesn't give us definition of how God's going to reframe, rework, rebuild, restore whatever feels like it's ruined. God has power over it. He has control over it. He has the ability to cause, as Paul would write in Romans, all things to work together for our good. That God can take and use that. And I hear that. I mean, I'm just going to be honest about how I hear that at times. Oh, okay, well, that's God going, okay, look, you got to eat your green vegetables, whether you like it or not, because it's good for you. That's not what God says. You know, that verse, God causes all things to work together for our good, says that God is at work restoring us, even in ways that we don't understand. And the outcome is incredible. It's life abundant. That's what Jesus says. But his plan, not my plan. And so the gift, the power, the hope of the empty tomb is not God's gonna fix this the way I want it fixed. You know, God's gonna give me all the money I want, all the toys I want, you know, this happy life with no conflict. That's not the promise and hope of in fact, it's not even a worthwhile hope. I mean, because we know the stories of those who've had all of those things and are still hopeless. So, we're chasing the wrong idea there, that we think that Jesus rising from the dead means he also is our ultimate fix-it man. What it means is that God can turn what seems to be ruined into something that is restored and treasured. That means when you say yes to Jesus, you come under the umbrella of being his child. You are now a priceless treasure. And he's at work on that, making that happen. So when it feels heavy and it feels hard, that reframes that. Okay, it's heavy, it's hard. I'm not going to deny that. It's not necessarily how I want things to go, but I can pick my eyes up just a little bit and look beyond, and I can say, but God is at work. And God is restoring, and he's got something really good. Really good.
Last thing we want to offer here as we bring this in for a landing is we often forget that. We don't intentionally forget it, but so often the cares and worries of this life grow up around the good seed. You know, Jesus used that parable of the four soils, and he talked about just how powerful the cares and the worries of life can be. And the allure of the things of this life in drowning out what God is inviting us into. And so one of the most helpful things for us as people are things that help us remember. Things that help us remember. You know, throughout the scriptures, there were different things that God implemented to help the people remember what was true, what was factual. You know, they get out of the wilderness and into the promised land. And as they cross that last boundary, the Jordan River, God says, I want you to pick up 12 stones, one for each of the tribes, and I want you to stack them up. so that when you see it, you remember what happened here.
Yeah.
And when your kids who weren't here ask, hey, what's up with that pile of rocks? Because that's weird, because clearly rocks don't grow like that. You can tell them the story of what happened here. God decrees all of these feasts and festivals that wasn't just about food. It was actually in large part about trusting him with survival, because he's saying, I want you to stop working and I want you to eat abundantly in a culture where survival is dependent upon growing enough food day after day. But he also says at these feasts and festivals, I want you to tell particular stories of our relationship, the times that you called out and asked for help, and I answered, and I came, and I saved, and I delivered, and I rescued, and I provided, because you're going to forget. And I'm not mad at you for that.
Yeah,
but
the enemy's great at that. The enemy will make your life so noisy that you won't remember. It'll be so noisy and so fast that you won't remember, and he works hard to do that. And just building on what you were doing there with the trajectory through the Old Testament, we get into the New Testament, and Jesus does the very same thing. See this bread? See this cup?
Every time.
Remember the cross. And when you remember the cross, what Paul's saying is you have to also remember the empty tomb. Payment was made, satisfied, death won, or death conquered. Jesus won. And so, I know we're headed towards just a practical application, and that when we wrap up the message, particularly during this series, we recognize that there's two kinds of people that are listening to us. And maybe that's true for our listenership on this podcast. There are those who don't yet have a relationship with Jesus and are considering it. And I would just say to you, why would you wait? Why would you wait? The simple starting point is, Romans 10 says, if you confess with your mouth that Jesus Christ is Lord and believe in your heart God raised him from the dead. There it is, the empty tomb. If you believe and confess and believe, then you'll be saved. You'll be restored, and you're set into not just. First Peter talks about God's given us through His great mercy the gift of a new birth, and then the inauguration of a restoration process, a living hope. And so if you're here and you've not yet entered into a relationship with Jesus, and you find yourself in that place where you go, I'm at a deficit of hope here. I feel ruined. The great news today is, listen, you're not ruined. And Jesus wants a relationship with you so he can restore what seems to be ruined. So I say yes to that. But then the second audience that is likely listening to us is those who are already followers of Jesus. And maybe you're in that place in life where hope is under siege for you, and the weight of whatever has made you feel like some part of you or all of you is ruined. How do you get out of that as a follower? So you've already got the relationship with Jesus. Well, here's what I would tell you. If you're feeling that sense of ruin, there are some habits that you can develop in your life that help protect you from the noise and the confusion that the enemy runs at you to make you feel like you are ruined. One of those is just the discipline of looking for the fingerprints of God. He left his fingerprints all over this place. And so learning to see where God has done the unexpected and the supernatural, and then jotting that down so that you've got a place that you can put your hands on it and go, okay, I'm struggling. There it is. It's like those stones of remembrance that God commissions his people to. So jotting it down and then walking in community with others who tell you their stories of restoration and you tell them your stories. Those two things, incredible helps if you're feeling ruined.
So thank you for trusting us with this part of your life where things don't always seem like they make sense. They seem a little uncertain. And as Lee said, reach out. We get to be a part of your journey this way. We'd love to play a greater role if we can. Thanks for letting us be on our journey as well and for being a part of that with us. So until next time, he's Lee. I'm John.
Thanks.
Hold on to hope.